woman, steps forward and offers to settle the score in single combat with any one of the Greeks. The deal? If he wins, Helen stays in Troy. If he loses, she returns to Greece. Menelaus, Helen's husband, thirsting for revenge, rises to the challenge. And quickly gets the upper hand. Paris retreats in fear. According to Homer, it is the gods who whisk him from the battlefield, as if he had simply disappeared. His retreat takes him to Helen's bedchamber, where she scolds him for his cowardice. But not too harshly. A handsome coward whose romance endangers a civilization? Was there really a Prince Paris of Troy? Is there any evidence he really lived? Tantalizing clues come from the people who lived just west of Troy, the Hittites, among the first in the world to use the written word.
In those Hittite texts, we find reference to a king of Wilusa named Alexandros. Alexandros is another name for Paris, who of course was a prince of Troy. It looks as if there were conflicts in the late Bronze Age around Troy and in association with this king named Alexandros or Paris. Many have interpreted this as an indication of the kinds of wars that are described by Homer in the Iliad.
And the Iliad is just getting started, because the mighty warrior Achilles has rejoined the fight after a close friend is killed by the Trojan prince Hector. Fueled by his rage, Achilles virtually wipes out the Trojan army and drives the remainders back inside the city gates. The Greek siege has come to the very walls of Troy. Homer described those walls in the Iliad.
The great walls and gates and timbered doors we hung, well planed, massive, and bolted tight, will shield the city.
But was there ever a great siege of Troy? Schliemann had found no evidence of it. But Schliemann would not have the last word on Troy. In 1932, Carl Blegen from the University of Cincinnati began a 7-season excavation of the mound at Hissarlik. Blegen was not the huckster that Schliemann was. He excavated with precision and scholarship. But the goal was the same: to find proof of the Trojan War. The 6th level of Troy was the wealthy, pastoral, international city where life was good. But Blegen's team discovered that the 7th level of Troy, the Troy that stood right at the time of Homer's Trojan siege, was a dramatically different place. They find that foreign luxury goods are gone. Signs of wealth have disappeared. Living conditions are cramped. What has happened to the once wealthy and peaceful Troy? Then, a critical clue. They find storage jars, big ones, and lots of them. The residents of Troy seem to be squirreling away their food.
All of the residents, or most of the residents living in the surrounding area, had moved up into the protection of the citadel. Then you would have had difficulty maneuvering through the streets of the city because houses were built very close to each other. There would have been enormous storage vessels that contained large quantities of food so that you didn't have to leave the protection of the citadel very often. And there would have been a kind of climate of fear.
Fear of what? Professor Rose believes that Troy 7 was, in fact, a city under siege, just as described in the Iliad. In Homer, it is the Greeks who are besieging Troy, and the endgame would take place just outside these fortification walls, where Achilles squares off against Hector in mortal one-on-one combat, with the fate of Troy on the line. Achilles slays the great Trojan prince, but worse is to come. He ties Hector's body to his chariot by the heels and drags it 3 times around the Troy city walls, as Hector's parents, King Priam and Queen Hecuba, watch in horror. Could it have happened? Did Greek aristocratic commanders square off hand-to-hand with their opposite? Again, the Hittites drop clues.
There is a text from the Hittite capital in Boazkoi which seems to refer to an aristocratic warrior from the Greek side fighting another aristocratic warrior from the Hittite side. So you did have these face-offs in the late Bronze Age.
In Homer, Achilles is not invincible. Like all mortals, he has a weakness. In his case, the heel. An arrow shot to the heel fells him. His killer, the once cowardly Paris. Achilles is dead. But do we have any evidence he ever lived at all? A small clue near Troy at the port town of Beshek Tepe. A cone-shaped mound that since antiquity has been regarded as the tumulus of Achilles. But excavations at the tumulus have come up empty, and the historical Achilles remains a mystery. Paris, slayer of Achilles and the cause of the war, is himself killed in battle. Paris's love affair had started the war. Could his death end it and change the fate of Troy? King Priam now has an opportunity to return Helen while saving face. But stubborn pride again tips the scales of fate in Homer's tale. Priam refuses to give up Helen. The Greeks will have to force their way into the fortress to get her. In the Iliad, it is the god Poseidon who builds the huge fortification walls of Troy. Homer has Poseidon say,
I walled the city massively in well-cut stone to make the place impregnable.
Impregnable walls. 10 years of siege, and the walls of Troy still stand. For such a small city, it seems unlikely. It was a puzzle that Carl Blegen would never solve.
Blegen stopped his excavations at Troy in 1938, and for the next 50 years, no one did anything at the site. The walls were crumbling, and it was in quite bad shape.
After his digs, it was presumed that the ground beneath Hissarlik had yielded all its secrets. But it hadn't. In 1992, a team from the University of Tübingen in Germany, along with a team from the University of Cincinnati, decided to dig again. This time using the high-tech sonar devices used to search the ground for oil deposits. But they did not strike oil. They struck rock. Rock that would change our understanding of how the Trojan War may have happened.
What we found was that if one goes 400 meters to the south of the main citadel of Troy, so that's about 1,200 feet, there's a rock-cut ditch that surrounded the entire lower city of Troy in the Troy 6 period.
A defensive perimeter well outside the city walls. This would make Homer's Troy several times larger than previously thought. Suddenly, Troy wasn't so small. Suddenly, Troy was looking much more defensible.
In order to attack the city, you would have had to have disembarked from your chariot, gone into and out of the ditch, all the while dodging arrows that were being shot at you by Trojans who were behind a wall not far in the distance. You then had to scale that wall, run through the lower city, that's 1,200 feet, and then you would have reached this enormous limestone fortification wall that surrounded the citadel. You had to get over that, and if you did that, all the while again dodging arrows that were raining down on you from Trojans on the other side, then you could sack the city. But with this dual system of defense, the settlement was nearly impregnable.
They had found the larger city Schliemann and Blegen had been looking for. The case for the Trojan War had taken a great leap forward. In Homer, the siege is at stalemate. the Greeks have suffered heavy losses and need a new plan to get inside the impregnable walls of Troy. To do that, they resort to trickery. They build a large wooden horse. The Greeks roll the horse to the city walls and apparently retreat. The Trojans find the horse and believe the Greeks are bearing a gift and have quit the fight.
Now the Trojans, who are apparently also not the brightest of bulbs, open up their gate, bring in the Trojan horse, and begin celebrating.
But it was no gift horse, and the Greeks had not retreated. Their fleet was hiding behind the island of Tenedos, near the harbor, waiting for the trap to be sprung. Could it have happened? Could one of the greatest military deceptions ever have been a historical fact?
All historical Greeks knew about the story of the Trojan horse. The minute they began to experiment with the representation of figures of the human form and of animals, it's one of the first things that they draw.
Why would such a story even be developed? Again, you have to remember these very strong defensive components of the city in the late Bronze Age. So it's not surprising that the story of some sort of trick to get into an impregnable city was developed. Why a horse is harder to say.
But there are some theories. In the days of fortress warfare, a besieging army would sometimes construct a siege engine, literally a rolling battering ram with soldiers inside. This Assyrian depiction from the 7th century BC, around Homer's time, shows a horse-like siege engine breaking the walls of a fortified city. Perhaps the Trojan horse was just such a device. But maybe the walls were broken by a natural rather than a man-made force, an earthquake. A fault line runs along northwestern Turkey, and earthquakes have struck this region frequently since antiquity. Carl Blegen's excavations in the 1930s uncovered considerable evidence that Troy was struck by a massive earthquake in the late 13th century BC. Perhaps it was an earthquake that weakened Troy and allowed the Greeks to rush the citadel. The horse or the earthquake? Can these competing theories be resolved?
Now we know that the 6th city of Troy is destroyed, probably by an earthquake. But you know, if Homer's telling this story, 10 years of fighting, epic saga, so on and so forth, you don't want to say, and then there was an earthquake and the walls fell down and they walked in. It's ending your story with a whimper rather than a bang.
But there is a theory, the horse as a symbol. The walls of Troy were reputed to have been built by the god Poseidon.
Poseidon is not just the god of the sea, he's also the god of earthquakes. He's frequently called the earth shaker. And the animal associated with Poseidon is the horse. So if you say earthquake equals Poseidon, Poseidon equals horse, ergo earthquake equals Trojan horse, you've got it. The Trojan horse could simply be a metaphor for the earthquake.
But in Homer, the horse is real, and the trick works.
At about midnight, once the Trojans have had, shall we say, a bit too much to drink, and they've all gone to sleep, the Mycenaeans inside the horse open up the trap door, climb on down, kill the guards at the gate, and open up the gate.
They kill every man in Troy, including King Priam. Meanwhile, Menelaus searches for Helen, determined to kill her. But when he finds her, he's captivated again by her beauty and carries her off. Once more, the simple beauty of a woman has profound impact on the fate of Homer's characters. But what do we really know about Helen of Troy? Could an epic 10-year war between trading giants really have been fought over the hand of a beautiful woman?
The Greeks of historical antiquity loved to believe in a Helen of Troy. So for them, Helen of Troy was a very real human being. Did she exist? Got me. But certainly the role of women in prehistoric Greece in the prehistoric Near East in cementing alliances between kings, between empires, is really undeniable.
But were women really abducted in wartime and transported across the Aegean, as the Greeks claim happened to Helen? This stone tablet from 13th century BC Greece could not be deciphered until 1952. It offers surprising clues that echo Homer. It lists the names of women abducted in war, including one named Toroja, or Woman of Troy. Women of Troy suffer the same fate in Homer, as the city is looted and its wealth seized. Troy is then burned to the ground, erasing the civilization of King Priam. We now know there was a Troy, and that it was destroyed in the 13th century BC. But was it really burned to the ground? If so, by whom? Schliemann craved